The air inside the car seemed frozen solid, only the faint hum of the air conditioning vents and the muffled thud of tires rolling over the pavement broke the silence, making it feel even more suffocating. This wasn't peaceful quiet, it was a tense, charged standoff, thick with hidden currents and lingering tension. Every inch of air seemed to carry the lingering scent of gunpowder. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white from the strain. My teeth were clenched so hard that my jawline hardened into a cold, rigid curve, and the fury boiling in my chest felt like it was burning right through me. Out of the corner of my eye, she huddled in the corner of the passenger seat, her knees drawn slightly toward her chest. Her dance bag lay clutched tightly against her chest like a lifeline. Her head was bowed low, her dark hair cascading down to cover most of her face, leaving only her tightly pressed lips, a pale, lifeless shade, exposed. She was desperately trying not to cry, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. Each breath she took to suppress her sobs felt like a tiny needle piercing my already frayed nerves. There was a moment, a fleeting instant that I knew I shouldn't have, yet couldn't help myself from having, when I felt like saying something. Not one of those fiery questions, not a sharp accusation, but just a simple phrase that might offer her a bit of comfort. I opened my mouth, the words already on the tip of my tongue, when suddenly her phone began to vibrate, shattering this fragile balance. She jumped at the sound, fumbling wildly for her phone, her fingers clumsy from exhaustion and tension. She glanced briefly at the screen, then looked up at me. I didn't turn around, my gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, every muscle in my body tense and rigid. She answered the call, her voice thin and trembling, yet she tried desperately to sound cheerful. "Hi. I'm fine." A faint, quivering laugh escaped her lips. "The audition went really smoothly. I'll be home soon." After a brief pause, her voice grew even softer. "Oh. Okay. All right. Bye." The phone hung up, and she stared at the screen for a long while, her thumb hovering just above the glass, as if she still had something to say but didn't know how to put it into words. I glanced at her briefly and saw her staring blankly at the screen, my chest suddenly seething with anger once again. I lowered my gaze back to the road, my voice as cold as ice. "You didn't tell him." Her body gave a slight involuntary shiver at the sound of my voice, as if she'd only just remembered that I was still there. She immediately adopted a defensive posture, curling in even tighter. "Tell him what?" "Tell him you almost got dragged into an alley by some thugs and nearly attacked. Tell him you're sitting in my car right now, heading home." My voice was laced with suppressed fury, just thinking about Taylor made my blood boil. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting away and landing on the dashboard, her voice barely audible, like a mosquito's buzz. "He's at a friend's place, he sounds really busy." That aggrieved, yet deliberately calm tone only made me even angrier. Busy? How busy could he possibly be? So busy that he wouldn't even answer his girlfriend's calls, so busy that he'd let her wander alone on a dark street late at night, so busy that he'd remain completely oblivious even when she nearly got into trouble. I let out a harsh, shrill laugh, a laugh that was icy and sharp as a blade. Of course he was at his friend's place, of course he was busy with his own stuff. He'd always been like that, putting Penny's affairs last, if not entirely forgetting about them altogether. Just thinking about how she'd almost been hurt by those jerks, and realizing that the whole mess had started because of me, the incompetent little brother, made me want to grab Taylor right this instant and show him just how much of a jerk he really is. "He's my brother," I growled, rage surging up my spine like wildfire. "But why on earth would you even date him in the first place?" She froze mid-motion, whirling around in her seat to glare at me. "He's always been so good to me," she said sharply, her voice fragile yet desperate. "Great." I shot back just as sharply, incredulous. "Great means someone would show up for you. Great means someone would put you first. Great doesn't mean letting you walk home alone through the whole city after dark because he's too lazy to call a taxi or drive 10 minutes out of his way to pick you up." She gasped, a flicker of almost hurt in her eyes. "You don't understand him at all. You don't understand us at all. All I know is that he's not here with you right now," I said, my voice low and dangerous. The silence that followed felt like a crack splitting right down the middle of the car, severing everything completely apart. We were almost at our residential complex now, the familiar streets flashed by outside the window, rows of neatly arranged houses blurring into one indistinct mass. I turned onto the street where we lived, the car light sweeping across the empty sidewalk. Then she spoke, her voice low, trembling, and hoarse. "If you hate me so much, why didn't you just let that guy attack me earlier? Why didn't you let me die?" I slammed on the brakes, and the car came to an abrupt stop in front of my parents' house. The tires skidded slightly over the loose gravel. Before I could say a word, or even process the shock of her words piercing my chest like bullets, she threw open the car door, stumbled onto the sidewalk, and slammed the door shut behind her. I shifted the car into neutral, leaned across the seat, seething with rage. "Where are you going?" She turned around, her face flushed red with anger and hurt. Tears welled up in her eyes, nearly spilling over. "Home." Her voice was sharp as a blade, laced with a desperate, all-or-nothing resolve. "If you're lucky, some pervert'll find me before I even get home. That way, you'll never have to see this spoiled, annoying face of mine again." Having finished speaking, she whirled around abruptly and strode forward down the sidewalk, her dance bag bumping against her hip. With every step, her body grew stiff and trembling with anger and fear. I sat in the car for just 1 second, no more than a second. From inside the house came my mom's cheerful greeting, but all I could think about was the desperate look in her eyes just moments ago, and that gruesome bruise on her arm. What if I'd let her walk away like that? What if she ran into danger again? If I hadn't found her today, the consequences would have been unimaginable. A fierce surge of protectiveness welled up inside me, overpowering all the anger I'd felt. I yanked open the car door, slammed it shut hard, and started walking briskly down the sidewalk after her. I couldn't let her go alone, not ever. Because she was wrong, terribly wrong. It wasn't that I ever hated her, it was that I hated myself for not finding her sooner, hated that Taylor, a bastard, had caused her so much pain. Watching her tiny figure stumble forward in the night, I can't help but want to tear this world apart, this very world, and Taylor herself, for making her feel she doesn't deserve anything better. She deserves someone who'll hold her close to their heart, someone who'll cheer for her when she nails that audition, someone who'll be there the instant she's in danger, instead of leaving her to bear all her fears and pain alone, as she's been doing now. My fists clenched tightly at my sides, my knuckles turning white. Someone has to take a closer look at those bruises on her arm, someone has to make sure she gets safely inside her home, someone has to let her know she's not alone. And clearly, that someone can only be me. Even if she doesn't appreciate it, even if she thinks I'm meddling too much, I just can't leave her to fend for herself.
The closer I get to home, the heavier my steps become. Each step feels like walking on the edge of a knife, the burning pain from standing on tiptoes for hours spread upward from my calves, while the bruises on my arms throbbed in time with my heartbeat, piercing deep into my bones. Yet none of these physical pains could compare to even 1/10,000th of the agony in my heart. I thought of the ecstatic joy I'd felt when I'd finally landed the audition, of the frantic panic I'd experienced when I'd missed the last bus, of the utter despair I'd felt trying repeatedly to call Tyler, only to hear his phone go straight to voicemail, of the terror I'd known when 3 thugs had cornered me in an alleyway, of the shock that had seized me when Ash had suddenly appeared. That day, I'd plunged from the clouds straight into hell. All those emotions had piled up together, forming a mountain so heavy it left me gasping for air. By the time I reached the porch, my hands were trembling so badly that, for the first time, as I tried to insert the key into the lock, it slipped right out of my fingers. I clenched my teeth, blinked hard, desperately trying to hold back the scalding tears, but they kept coming, like beads unraveling from a broken string, growing more and more abundant. I tried again, but still the key wouldn't align with the lock. It just scraped uselessly against the doorframe. For the 3rd time, I just couldn't hold on any longer. My legs gave way, and I leaned against the cold wooden door, my forehead pressed against its surface. I squeezed my eyes shut tight, and the sobs that had been building up inside me finally broke free, turning into heart-wrenching cries. Tears streamed down uncontrollably, soaking my cheeks, wetting the sleeves of my clothes, even seeping into the cold wood of the door itself. It was all so awful, everything was just utterly terrible. Exhaustion, Fear, heartbreak. All of it swelled up like a massive wave, crushing everything in its path. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, and I simply couldn't go on anymore. It wasn't until I turned around to wipe my face that I heard his voice. Oh my God. I gasped sharply, stumbling backward, my heart leaping into my throat. Asher was standing right there, a dark silhouette under the porch light, tall, composed, utterly silent, as if he'd been chiseled out of the very darkness itself. What the hell? I screamed, wiping away the tears from my face. How can you walk without making a single sound? You're such a big guy. There should have been some sound by now, he said. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me with those enigmatic, unfathomable eyes. For some reason, it made me feel even more humiliated. What on earth are you even doing here? I snapped, my voice rising higher and higher, laced with hysteria. Something inside me finally shattered completely. I slammed my palm hard against his chest, but he didn't budge an inch. I shoved him again, losing all control, utterly desperate. I was furious, at him, at Taylor, at the whole world, and furious at myself, too. I threw myself onto him, punching his chest with all my might, trying to shove him off my porch, out of my mind, out of my life. But he just stood there, like a wall, unmoving, utterly indifferent. Finally, when I'd exhausted every last bit of strength and collapsed against the doorframe, gasping for air, he spoke, in that deep, calm voice that drove me absolutely crazy. Are you done making a scene yet? I let out a trembling, broken sigh. I mumbled in defeat, wiping my eyes again and sniffing loudly. Then I looked up at him, glaring. Why did you come? He studied me for a long moment, his eyes briefly flickering with an elusive emotion. To make sure you get home safely. I snorted derisively, turning back toward the door and clumsily fumbling for my keys once more. You don't care about any of this at all.
I don't, he said.
But that's just what you're supposed to do when a woman is walking home alone late at night. It's only 8 o'clock. I shot back bitterly. And you saw it yourself. There are already scumbags like that prowling around at 8 o'clock. He retorted immediately, without hesitation. His words stung more than I'd expected, sending a shiver through me. The roughness of his hands and the sharpness of his sarcastic remarks flooded back into my mind in an instant. He must have noticed, because suddenly he stepped closer and grabbed my wrist, not tightly, not painfully, but firmly enough to make me look straight at him. Without saying a word, he took the key from between my trembling fingers, opened the door himself, held the door open for me, but neither stepped inside nor returned the key to me. I slipped past him into the pitch-dark hallway, wrapped my arms tightly around myself, turned around, and asked in a voice tense and wary, "What do you think you're doing?" "Someone's got to take a look at your arm," he said calmly. "It's nothing," I argued weakly. "Maybe it really is nothing," he replied, "but we still ought to check it out." "And then what? Are you just going to stay away from me?" He nodded, his expression silent and enigmatic. I hesitated, for I was utterly exhausted because I didn't want to argue anymore, and because somewhere deep inside me still wasn't ready to face everything alone. I nodded toward the hallway. "The bathroom's this way." He followed quietly behind me. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and his presence hung over us like a dark cloud, filling the tiny space to capacity. In the bathroom, I flipped on the light and blinked sharply at the sudden brightness. Then I pulled off my short top. The bruise now looked even worse, a dark reddish-purple mark spreading across my upper arm like a grotesque flower. The crescent-shaped scratches left by my fingernails were just beginning to swell. I frowned, staring at my reflection in the mirror, looking utterly disheveled. "It's just a bruise. What could you possibly find out?" Ash stepped closer and reached out without the slightest hesitation. His fingers closed gently around my arm, calloused from years of gripping guns, yet surprisingly tender. His movements were steady and careful, avoiding the most painful parts of my injury. He gently rotated my arm, examining the bruise and the nail marks closely. His brow furrowed deeper and deeper, and the anger in his eyes was almost palpable, threatening to spill over. And look at those nail marks, he murmured softly, his voice tinged with barely perceptible concern. They really need to be treated properly, otherwise they'll get infected. I bit my lip hard, trying desperately not to burst into tears again, yet my eyes still felt unbearably hot. He turned around, took a clean cloth from the shelf, dampened it with lukewarm water, and with military-like precision and composure, wrung it out thoroughly before gently pressing it against the bruise on my skin. The warmth seeped through the cloth into my skin, chasing away some of the chill. I couldn't help but shiver, not from cold, but from the warmth radiating from his fingertips, which, through the fabric, quietly spread deep into my heart. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. I forgot to breathe, forgot even to cry. I looked up at him, taking a closer, more serious look at him for the first time. His dark hair fell messily across his forehead, lightly dampened with sweat, lending him an air of lived-in authenticity. The scar above his left eyebrow wasn't menacing at all. It only made him appear even more rugged and resolute. On his thick neck, a faint white line, a trace of some unknown past, seemed to tell a story of its own. His jawline was sharply defined, covered by a layer of dark stubble. His lips were tightly pressed together, his expression focused and serious. What most captivated me were his eyes, sharp and profound, but now they lacked their usual coldness and anger. All that remained was concern and tenderness. He stared intently at the bruise, as if it weren't on me at all, but on himself, obsessively, almost maniacally attentive, as though he'd tear the entire world apart with his bare hands just to make sure nothing like this ever happened to me again. We stood so close that I could smell the faint scent of soapberry and sunshine on him, mingled with a subtle hint of sweat, a combination that, strangely enough, brought me a sense of comfort. The air was thick with a delicate atmosphere, one devoid of our previous arguments and confrontations, leaving only a silent gentleness and a stirring of emotion. By the time I realized it, I'd already started crying again, silent, helpless tears sliding down my cheeks. He noticed and stopped what he was doing. For a split second, we all held our breath. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. The words tumbled out one after another, so fast I couldn't stop them. "I know you think I'm spoiled, like a princess, and maybe, compared to everything you've been through, I really am." I sobbed, gripping the sink so tightly it felt as if it could somehow keep me from falling apart. But controlling everything, making sure everything is perfect, that's the only way I know how to keep my life from falling apart. I shook my head, shame burning across my skin. I was actually feeling so happy today. For the first time ever, I was proud of myself. And yet, here's how it ended. Just me. I lost control. My behavior was completely irrational. I wiped at my face aimlessly, feeling smaller and more pathetic with each passing second. I was absolutely terrified out there just now. I don't know what to do. I couldn't go on, and another ugly sob escaped me. He remained silent for a long while. Finally, I dared to lift my head and looked at him through blurry, tear-filled eyes. His expression hadn't changed at all, still stern, still sharp, but it had softened just a little, ever so slightly. "I shouldn't have yelled at you," he said in a deep, raspy voice. "And besides, I don't know you well enough to even say you're spoiled." I let out a broken laugh and wiped my nose with the back of my hand. "Oh, really? Now you feel sorry for me. Because you know my parents abandoned me, my boyfriend dumped me, the bus left me stranded, even the Uber driver ditched me." He gave a faint smile, a smile so subtle it was almost imperceptible, just the slightest twitch of his lips. "Pretty much," he said coolly. I stared at him for what felt like an eternity, and suddenly, a tight knot in my chest seemed to loosen painfully. He suddenly took a step back, letting his hands drop to his sides. "You'll be okay on your own, right?" he asked, his voice once again hoarse. Just thinking about having to face everything all by myself sent a shiver through me, but I forced myself to nod anyway. "Yeah." I lied. He nodded in return, a brief, decisive nod, then turned to leave. I followed him into the hallway. The floorboards creaked softly beneath our feet. As we reached the door, he hesitated for a moment, then glanced back over his shoulder. Asher, I called out softly. He turned around. Thanks, I said. Thanks for everything you've done. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for not leaving me behind. He nodded again, somewhat awkwardly, then stepped out into the night. I watched as he descended the steps and disappeared into the shadows, swallowed up by the darkness. On impulse, I shouted after him. Don't let anyone stab you on the way. I shouted. He didn't answer. But just before he completely disappeared into the darkness, I swear I saw him shake his head and then smile.